All right, folks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Some of y'all may have been present for the panel that we did back in late October on the Guilford Park folks who are also poll workers. This is really kind of a space for us to lean on the wisdom of the folks here in the church, which we have much wisdom here at Guilford Park. Just because, as I said this morning in worship, mine should by no means be the only voice. And so these people who are here can speak with much more authority than I on the intricacies of healthcare and the intersection of faith and healthcare. So thank you all. Go ahead and have any questions you all have. I already heard one person coming up and asking Bill a question that maybe he'll address later on. As always, this is a space where I'm hoping that we can disagree without being disagreeable. I think that is something that that is a value that we all have here. So we may not agree on exactly how to fix our broken healthcare system, but hopefully you and I can together agree that there are just certain values that are non-negotiable when it comes to being a follower of Jesus: compassion and mercy and caring for our neighbors. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So thank you all for the panelists for being here. We have Erin Blackmon. Erin and her husband Michael stumbled upon us a couple months ago at one of our Theology on Taps at Bitter's Social House. Y'all were there for like a wedding party
it was for Michael's birthday.
Oh, that's right.
We had gotten a huge group of our community theater friends to get dinner at Mizumi's, and we had a 45-minute wait. So we walked on over to Bitter's Social House, and we saw the sign, theology group meeting upstairs, and that piqued our interest. So we headed on up and we asked how we could be a part of it.
And now she's on a panel. So Erin and then the other faces should be pretty familiar here. Gwyn Chapel, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves here in a second. Judy Herron Lasley, Ann Swain, and Bill Hickling. Robert was going to be with us today. Unfortunately,
Abby's not well.
Abby's not well, so Robert could not be.
Corey's out of town.
Be with us.
Of course.
He is not a medically trained professional, but has quite a lot of experience in the kind of the administrative side of running a hospital. So if you have any particular questions about that, I'm sure Robert would be happy to answer that. So just real quick, if you would, I'd like to go down this way, or starting with Gwyn this way. If you could just introduce for us in about 2 minutes each. I'm really going to try to hold you all to 2 minutes. What is your background in the healthcare? What is your corner of the healthcare profession, and how you found yourself in that work, and kind of what are your passions and interests when it comes to that work? So let's start with Gwyn here for about 2 minutes. Just share a little bit about your background as a healthcare provider.
Okay.
And all of us are going to have to use our big preacher voices.
Nobody has ever told me that I don't have that.
So make sure y'all are nice enough. Go ahead, Gwyn.
Okay. I am a retired obstetrician gynecologist, and if you go Google my name under where I lived, you're not going to find any Dr. Chapel unless you see my husband. I was practiced under my maiden name, Dr. Harrison, and I did my residency at Thomas Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. That's where I met my husband, and then we ended up, for a long story, why we ended up in Western Maryland, where we lived for from 86 to 2020, and we lived there. We had practices. We retired, and then our son, we had there. He went to Virginia Tech. He went to did a training at Danville, and then he found about Greensboro. He ended up coming here, and then when we said we were gonna move down here, he said, why are you looking in Nashville when we live here? And so we came here, and when I came here, well, the story about how I was at Bell Choir, and the Bell Choir director, the Bell Choir person in where I used to live, there was a person there, and she said, where are you moving? Greensboro. I'm thinking that Mary Bruce lives there. And so Mary, and so she found this name, and so I came here, and then the problem was I came down here and it was a pandemic. So I've done no obstetrics and gynecology here. The first place I went to, first hospital we were in, which was a Catholic hospital, and I'm not Catholic, never been Catholic, and they had in the emergency room, they had a sign that says, if you're pregnant or having a problem with your pregnancy, we will not dissuade you because you don't have insurance or don't have a doctor. And I'm sort of paraphrasing it. It said something more articulate than that. But I always thought that was nice. And when I lived in Maryland, it was nice because you could get medical assistance pretty easily. So people that were poor could get a medical card. And the medical assistance program was pretty good there. And so they could give good care, both gynecology and obstetrics. I did both. Unlike most of my colleagues, I loved obstetrics more than I loved gynecology. I just love delivering babies.
All right, thanks, Gwyn. Erin, go ahead.
So my name's Erin Blackmon. I believe this is my third time visiting Guilford Park. I've got a master's degree in occupational therapy, and I've been an OT since January of 2022. I spent 2.5 years in Eden, North Carolina, working there at UNC Rockingham in the skilled nursing facility. It had both short-term rehab as well as long-term. I was there for 2.5 years, and then the drive was just getting to be too much because I live in Greensboro. So I looked at jobs a little closer to home, and I currently work. I've been at friend's home in Guilford for about 5 months now. It includes independent living, assisted living, as well as skilled nursing. I work with the older population. A lot of my classmates at Lenore-Rhine worked with the younger population, worked with little kids, like in school systems or outpatient clinics. I give them serious kudos. I could never do that. But I absolutely love working with the older population. I find I learn so much from my elders, and they can learn some things from me as well. It's so nice.
Love you too.
Thank you. Let's see. I at first when I was in college in my undergrad, I actually wasn't thinking about going into OT. Very different. I was going to school for musical theater. I sincerely enjoy performing, and I love doing community theater shows. But around my senior year, I thought to myself, I like this. I don't want to do this as a career. So I was looking into other options, and I remembered a time in my childhood I had worked with an occupational therapist in the school system. She taught me how to hold my pencil correctly, among other things, and she was so kind and encouraging. And truly, the thing that makes me happiest and the thing that makes me feel the most fulfilled is knowing that I've helped somebody out through a hard time, or just even for a moment made somebody's life a little brighter, a little easier. And that's basically what occupational therapists get to do all the time. So I found that very appealing. So I took all the prereqs I had to take to apply for grad school, and I took the GRE, and now I'm here, and I'm really enjoying it.
Some of y'all know her as Judy Herron, others know her as Judy Lasley. I just know her as
Been
Judy.
here about 49 years. It's true.
So Judy, tell us a little bit about your background in the helping professions.
My professional life began in nursing, but before long, I went on to graduate school in counseling and have done that most of my professional career. And in Greensboro, have worked in several community agencies, but mostly at the Presbyterian Counseling Center for a number of years, and I worked with adults, and I worked a lot with marital couples, and did group work with women, and I loved it all. And I always knew God was there. Whether or not someone was ready to talk about God, God was there. So, you know, that's really my main message today, is that however a person arrives, whatever the content is, God is in the midst of it. So I love that work, and I'm honored here to sit with women who are grieving at Guilford Park. Otherwise, I'm retired.
All right, thank you, Judy. And you and Ralph have been one of our newest members here at Guilford Park. Y'all have been here a couple years now.
Yep.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So we, Ralph and I moved here late 22 and became members a year ago. And so we moved from Montana. 2 minutes is, if you want to know how I got to be where I am.
We're not legalists.
Yeah. I too started out in nursing. I have worked in several different types of healthcare facilities, anything from long-term care to community hospital to teaching hospital, and have seen all sorts of things that you might not always get to see. I look at it as an opportunity. But I have a PhD in psychology, and that came from interaction with family members in the healthcare system and how they were dealing with chronic illness or information that they weren't prepared to receive, and how they managed with their loved one or friend, whomever was the patient, and came into some very interesting dynamics with families especially. So I took a very, very circuitous route in getting a PhD, which would be a book actually. But I ended up mostly focusing on issues of aging, but I've counseled people from, when they come to you, as you know, they think it's one reason. And in your conversations, there is a lot of interaction and discussion, and you find out that the depth of their reason to be there is not at all what they thought their reason is. I never advertised, and certainly did not advertise as a Christian counselor, but my office in the later years was actually in our lower level of our church building. And I had a lot of my own faith articles that were important to me that, as Judy said, I always knew God was a part of my counseling, even though my counseling was non-proselytizing. But most times it would get there because people would start asking their questions. And that was very important. Such a variety of people in counseling that and if you have questions about those folks, I'd be happy to share. I too am retired from counseling. However, I am certainly available for any type of counseling, but like I said, my expertise is issues of aging and cognitive issues, dementia care, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Ann. And last but not least, Bill.
So I came to Greensboro in 1984 to moonlight against the explicit orders of the chairman of my department at UNC Chapel Hill. I had 3 boys. I had loans from medical school. We were living paycheck to paycheck, and were in debt, and I needed to find a way to provide for my family. So I came here. I was in a fellowship doing EEG. I'd gone through 3 years of pediatrics, 3 years of neurology and child neurology, and a year of EEG, and so 7 years of training, and still was not making much money. In fact, when we started in Dallas, my wife was making more as a nurse than I was making as a doctor. And it's just the way that it was at that time. And no bank wanted to loan to us. So, I worked every third weekend for 2 of the neurologists here in town who were looking to add on a partner. And of course, that came from Mary. Mary came home and said, "These guys are looking for somebody." She said, "Why don't you get up with them and find out if you can moonlight for them?" Of course, the brains of the operation, right? Tactical. So, we worked here for a year, and there were 2 groups in town at that time, and I was able to, so we weren't hugely busy with call. I'd see 10 new people a weekend from Friday until Monday morning when I had to get back to UNC. And we'd open up the clinic to see kids on Saturday mornings. And so that gave me an intro into the community, and my future partners got a chance to see how I practiced, and I got a chance to see how they practiced, which never happens. I mean, it doesn't happen. And so there was a great deal of trust among the 3 of us, and though I had many other opportunities that I looked at, Greensboro, there was no reason not to stay. And so I became Greensboro's first child neurologist, and was the only child neurologist for over 25 years, and had served for 37 years or so when I retired at 70 from Cone. Things that were important to me is that I established the kids got taken care of by the adult neurologists, that they were so happy, one in particular, to see me. One who I ultimately became partner with 7 years after coming here, and they were really only too happy to just as you're uncomfortable with kids. I was very comfortable with kids, and that was my thing. But it was not possible to do just kids because I had to hold up my part of the practice for the adults as well. And I grew to love that as much as my kids because those were very special experiences. So I think I'll cut it at that point. I have been privileged in this community to serve it for all of my professional life, and though I have retired and I'm happy not to be doing the job daily, not a day goes by where I don't think about my parents and my kids and what they meant to me in my life.
All right. Well, now you all know our panelists. Let's go ahead and hop right into some of the scriptures that we've been talking about the past few weeks. The first one that we journeyed through was on January 12th, when we went through what is probably the most familiar of the texts that we're having in the sermon series, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in that, we talked a little bit about beginning with a basic theological premise that I hope none of us here would disagree with, that the body is sacred, right? That the good news of the gospel is not merely spiritual good news or philosophical good news, or even good news that only kicks in once we die. It's good news for us here and now and for our bodies. So you've already, obviously this is a story about an outsider whose faith was interpreted his faith in such a way as it really literally saved the life of his neighbor. You are all persons of faith and medical practitioners in one way or another. And you've already kind of hinted on this, that your faith affects how you provide health care. And I think we would all agree from an ethical standpoint that we must never impose our faith upon anyone whose care we are entrusted with. But inevitably, as persons of faith, I would imagine that has affected how you all do your sacred work. So some of y'all have already hinted on it, but I'm wondering if any of y'all might elaborate just a little bit more on how your faith has affected the work that you are doing now or have done in the past? Would any of y'all like to speak to that? Let's do Judy and then Gwyn.
Okay. Well, when someone comes in for counseling, I think we begin with the fact that somebody just wants to be heard, you know, and, excuse me, I have a cold today. So I begin with honoring that person and that person's story. Listening for the concerns, listening, where's the pain, where's the problem, but also where are the resources within this person, where are the strengths, where are the resources within the family. So trying to, from the beginning, honor the story and make sure that the person realizes he or she is heard. And so that's right, I'm not going to instill my view of God or anything about our content. So there's the listening, the honorable listening. And many of you know how to do some of that very well, I think, because we're a caring congregation. We've done a lot of listening. Yeah. So we start with that. I think that's one way we treat the person as holy. The person has come, and this is kind of like holy ground here. And just tell me your story. Then another way that is kind of a sense of holiness is confidentiality in listening. The person's identity is confidential. The content of the session together is confidential. The records of the content are confidential. You know, so that's standard. That's not just spiritual God counseling. That's standard professional counseling. And then one other thing in terms of honoring the body is that sometimes a referral is very important from counseling, a medical or a psychiatric referral. And at the Presbyterian Counseling Center, we could do some of that in-house psychiatric counseling. But a referral is very important.
Thank you, Judy. Gwyn, your thoughts?
Well, I always said that my job, 99% of the time, it's great. But the 1% totally sucks. And one of the ways that it sucks is if a woman has a stillbirth, which means that the baby dies before it's born. And there was a woman that came in. She wasn't my patient. She was somebody else's patient. And she had a stillbirth. And the doctor was Catholic. And she said, well, why did this happen? It was God's way. And I'm sorry, I hate that. And I've told you that. Yeah. And maybe my belief is wrong. I believe God's put in place everything here, and then things happen because they happen. And so she was beside herself. Here she is, she's just gone through the worst experience of her life. And she's beside herself. And the nurses are like, I'm never going to see him again. And the nurses are like, and so I'm just sitting there, minding my own business. Well, I kind of heard some of the stuff. And so, can you go in and talk to her? Can you take her as a patient? He's not going to be, Dr. Connor's not going to be happy with this. We'll deal with that. So I went in and talked to her, and so I just, so I said to her, I said, look, I'm not a professional theologian, but I believe that if God didn't do this to you, it just happened. But I feel like God could be with you I don't even remember, I think she was also Catholic, and there was this whole thing about then with Catholics that if the baby isn't baptized, it can't receive last rites. I think they've changed all that. And it can't go to hell. It goes to limbo, which I had never even heard about. I never knew what limbo was. A limbo. And, this idea, I read a little bit about this, and it's sort of their teaching is different. I don't know. And so they wouldn't allow a stillbirth, because the baby was never born alive, to be baptized. And we would routinely baptize these babies. The nurses would baptize. Sometimes if they had a pastor, the pastor, if it was not Catholic, would come in. Sometimes they would come in. And sometimes people would actually have their baby buried. I mean, if it was full-term size. I mean, it's really, it's different things. And the nurses, we came up with this, and mostly it was the nurses, and it was a group of us, different religions, of how to do this. And they did a lovely, they would take a seashell, clamshell, and they would put water in it, and then they would baptize the baby. And they would say always, if you are capable of being baptized, because, you can't really, some people say, well, they can't be baptized, and then, give them the name, whatever they have, and we would give them the seashell afterwards, and we would dress them. They had blankets that we would wrap the baby in, and if the baby, we try to take pictures of the baby that, so they had something memorable. A lot of times the nurses would cut it, if the baby had some hair, cut a piece of the hair and put it. And they would do footprints and stuff like that, and I just thought that was so
Holy.
What?
Holy.
I just thought it was so wonderful. And all these nurses came together of different religions. I mean, there were Catholics, Lutherans, Presbyterians, there were all kinds of people, and we came up with this idea of to do this. And I just thought that was, you took a bad thing and you made it just a little bit better.
I apologize, by the way, at the beginning of this conversation, I should have prefaced it by saying that we might be talking about some sensitive topics in this. I meant to do that, I did not. If you need to get up and take a walk or take a space that you need, please know that is certainly okay. I think it's interesting, Gwyn, that you all as healthcare professionals are with people in their most vulnerable times, and that our theology really does matter. And this is not to pick on our Catholic siblings, by the way. There's bad theology. We all have. There's plenty of bad theology to go around. That the way that we talk about God does matter, even if, Erin or Ann or Bill, is there any anecdotes that you all have on how your faith has affected your work?
Sure. So I'm not sure how well versed this everybody is in the care of people with dementia, but one of the last things that a patient with dementia will hold on to is like rituals that they grew up with, and hymns, songs that they grew up with, songs that they heard in church.
Christmas carols.
Exactly. And I have worked in both locations with people with dementia, and honestly, one of the hardest things to do sometimes is just like be able to establish trust, build rapport with them. And I worked with some people with dementia, and I would ask them if they went to church, and there were actually quite a few people that I worked with who were the wives of pastors or were pastors themselves, and we have a term in the therapy world, both physical and occupational therapy, called therapeutic use of self. That is when you kind of like, you share something that is very personal to you, in order to kind of like build rapport and trust with your patient so that they'll participate optimally in whatever treatment you have for them. So more often than not, I asked if they go to church, if they went to church, and they would say yes, and I asked them, would it be okay if I sang a hymn? And they say sure. And no matter what, how, I guess, for lack of a better word, far gone they were, they oftentimes will sing the hymn with me, or at the very least mouth the words. And everybody has good days and bad days, and sometimes me singing hymns doesn't always work out. Sometimes they still don't want to participate in therapy, and of course that's their right. You can't force anybody to do anything, especially in healthcare. And I had a couple, where I used to work in Eden, I was able to establish a connection with a couple of patients who have gone on to be with God now. It's been a couple years, but there was one patient that I had who she didn't always like participating in therapy, but she did like when I would sing songs to her or like tell her about some of my community theater escapades. And she passed not long after a Christmas. I think it was Christmas of 23. And her husband would come to the facility pretty much every day to visit her, and his brother, who was also in that same facility. And it was getting close to the point where she was going to go be with God, and she was not on caseload at the time. But her husband sought me out and asked, "Erin, can you sing her a Christmas song?" She wasn't all there, but I still think that she heard it. So yep, I took a couple minutes and sang a Christmas carol for him, and I ended up singing at her funeral as well as another patient's funeral who I made a really great connection with. He was just like a big and tall guy. He actually played football in college, and he had a hard time at the hospital he was at. And he said, he was in bed, and he had been in bed at the hospital for a long time, like never really got the chance to just sit in a chair. And I was talking to him, and I was telling him about like what I was planning on doing with him during my evaluation. And he said, don't worry about trying to get me in the chair. Like, I'm a bigger guy. I don't know if you can do it. And I was like, yes, I can. Thankfully, I had one of my coworkers help me, but just the small act of being able to just sit in a chair, just get out of bed for a little bit, meant so much.
Thank you, Erin. Ann or Bill, anything to add before we move on to medical debt?
Well, I always have, but I just am mindful of time. For me, access to care was always important. And coming to Greensboro in '84 and then settling here, I was blessed to be in both in a community and medical center where we saw everybody, and regardless of their ability to pay or anything else. And I was always that was an article of faith. These were God's children, and they came to their illness, as Stephen has said, through no fault of their own, and they needed an advocate. And so for me, that being an access practice, having you walk in the door and we provide the care for you, and we don't really worry about how it's going to come on out, because you're very important. So that was one thing. The other is that I was on our hospital ethics committee, and the ethics committee is responsible for dealing with some of the most difficult times in a person's life, when a person is near the end of life, and the healthcare team feels like the care that they're giving is futile. That is, that the patient is not going to benefit, they're not going to recover. The best that one can do is keep them comfortable. And when there is a disagreement with family members, some of whom have never seen this person for years, and so are coming in from a totally different perspective, they're all nodding because they've all seen it, and they're guilty and they want to go down to the last heartbeat. That's when you have to start having really difficult conversations. And as part of the ethics committee, sitting on down with families, with these folks, establishing a rapport in a situation where they have no trust in the system and no trust in their providers, and trying to get them to say, so if you were the person sitting in that bed, what would you tell me that you wanted to have done with you? And that usually is an icebreaker.
Oh, yeah.
That would get people to start thinking not about what their needs were, but what was the need of the person that was relevant. And so I'll stop there, but that's to be able to see, as Gwyn has talked and Erin's talked to people, see who is there, and to be able to empathize with that was allowed us to do, to allow that person to have what I call a good death. A good death is where people are at peace, the patient is at peace, the family is at peace, the caregivers are at peace, because very often situations like this are as hard on the staff who are there, particularly the nurses, because we're sort of in and out, but they're there all the time. That very often, after a really difficult time, we have to be counseling the nurses and sit down and sort of debrief and let them talk and then about their frustrations and how hard it was. And there was never a tougher time for our community than COVID, many other communities. So I'll stop there.
So let's move on to the topic of healthcare equity. Last week we talked about the problem of medical debt, that 100 million Americans owe a collective $220 billion in medical debt currently. That 50% of African Americans or African American individuals are 50% more likely to have medical debt, and Hispanic individuals are 35% more likely to carry medical debt. And we talked about this radical text in the Old Testament called the Year of Jubilee, which every 7 or 50 years, depending on whether you're either the Deuteronomy account or the Leviticus account, wipes debts clear. And it does not mention medical debt specifically. It wasn't quite the problem then as it is now, or at least it's much more complex. So I'm just curious, let's together solve medical debt in the next 5 minutes. You want to do that? This is obviously a conversation that is vastly complex, but I'm curious as to your interpretation of that passage. Is it a pipe dream? I mean, is it just, or what can we as people of faith, how can we respond faithfully to that? Gwyn, what are your thoughts?
You didn't touch on one part. Is for, I mean, I don't know how expensive it is for you to go to medical school. I mean, some medical schools, it could be $50,000. Where I went to medical school was state school, and it was $3,000 a year for the tuition. There was like, obviously, I live and stuff like that, food. But that was less than my college was. Now, I graduated from college in 1976, and so medical school I started in 78, and so, that's all. My husband went to Tulane medical school, and it was incredibly expensive then. I don't even know what it is now. And so because of that, he joined what's called the Public Health Service, which he had to 2 years of tuition and expenses for 2 years working in an underserved area. And that's how we ended up where we did in Western Maryland, I mean, sort of in a roundabout way. But there's only one school, it's NYU, and there's somebody, I don't know this woman, she donated so much of her money that there's a trust now that nobody who goes to medical school there pays any tuition.
It's not just one. This is
NYU?
yeah, at NYU Langone. At Cornell Weill, which is where I went in New York City 2 years ago, through the largesse of, there's just huge numbers of donors. The tuition is somewhere near $80,000, and then that's without room, board, and other living in New York.
You're living in New York.
So when I went, it was about $10,000 a year or so back in the late 70s. And fortunately, my parents got me through 2 years, but I had a brother and sister, and they were going to school, and you know, I got the largesse getting 4 years at MIT and 2 years at Cornell. I mean, I really, you know, I lucked out, but loved my brother and sister and my parents. My mom had gone back to work to get a master's in teaching, or none of that would have been possible. And then when she died earlier this year, and my brother remembered just what a gift Mom had given to us to get us through school. So I had worked a summer from when I graduated early from MIT, and worked until I went to Cornell. Made about $9,000 or $10,000 during that time working working 60 hours a week at 2 different jobs. So I had a year, and then it took forever for me to pay off my 4th year. I mean, we were still paying off my 4th year when I got here to Greensboro, and just, you know, paying basically not much more than the interest, and so it took a long time to amortize this. But Cornell also is a school where all medical students graduate without debt now. And what that allows them to do is to be able to offer the positions at the school based on one's merit and one's abilities and one's interest and diversity and other sorts of things without having to worry about getting on through. And my son Matt and Kelly have friends who are their age, and they're in their 40s, who had together, they were docs, they had over $600,000 in debt between the two of them when they got out of their program. And it definitely affects where you go, what you do, what your credit, being able to buy a home, being able to, everything. So,
you tend to want to go to a specialty where you're going to earn a lot more money quicker.
So this is changing, and you know, many medical centers are now realizing how important it is to be able to significantly defray that for you know, as many of their students as they can. So
Ann or Judy or Erin, I know medical debt may not, or that sort of thing may not have been part of your emphasis, but I'm curious on your interpretation of the passage.
I'll put a parenthesis on this regarding the Presbyterian Counseling Center. Folks who come there for counseling may bring their insurance card, and our staff helps you file. And if you do not have insurance, or there's a hitch in all of that, we have a sliding fee scale based on income. This is nothing about like what we're talking about with medical debt, but there is a sliding fee scale at the counseling center based on income. And that's because of the generosity of individuals and churches in Greensboro. And there is a fund there now to which you may contribute. And it's an ongoing gift to the community. So it usually works out. There's not much of an accumulation of debt there.
Ann, please.
So having come from Montana, there is very limited mental health counseling available. And the specialties are finite. And so I offered my practice for no charge. I was very fortunate to be able to do that, and very fortunate that my church gave me space to have in their building at no charge. And that opened up so many doors. We didn't open all the doors to the church, but I had a door that they came in. But, and it was by word of mouth that we had folks from all walks of life who would come through our church door. I had a back entrance so they could maintain confidentiality, and I scheduled so no one crossed paths. But they came because they had no other sources and they had no resources. And it was just a variety of individuals. And I did have some who tried to offer money, and so I suggested that it be a donation, and we developed a fund that, because of some of the folks that were coming to me needed other assistance, that we would be able to offer other assistance to them. When they would mention things to me during counseling, I would ask them if it would be okay if we could offer a small amount of assistance. I never offered a particular amount because I needed to determine, how it was really going to be used. But that was one of the ways that we really tried to help in a situation where they weren't going to get counseling if we didn't offer it that way. So I was very grateful to be able to do that. The other thing that came to my attention, and in some research, there are numerous Christian health insurance organizations. So families and I learned this through friends in Montana, they did not have health insurance and came up with some very severe illness, and through this Christian health insurance program, they basically, which they were part of, they received checks that paid for an ongoing health issue, and I'm talking about a very serious cancer diagnosis that was unknown as far as whether the person was going to survive or not. And they would receive checks as part of this program from other members that paid for their entire medical debt. So everything was paid for. So the medical debt program that you've talked about in church, I'm wholeheartedly for that and would participate in it in a heartbeat. I think that's extremely important to do as part of our call as Christians.
I agree wholeheartedly with that.
Absolutely.
Let's pivot now to today's passage. Let's talk a little bit, continuing on healthcare equity, moving from the financial part of it to being inclusive of our neighbors who have chronic illnesses, disabilities, who are neurodivergent, and otherwise. Today's story is a really beautiful story and a heartbreaking story of not only how doctors or so-called doctors, the text is a little bit loose on who these actual doctors were that took this woman's money, had failed her, but also tragically how the community had failed her by ostracizing her because of her chronic illness. And one of the things I tried to hint at in my sermon today was that the healing that took place wasn't just her physically, but rather I tried to imagine that perhaps the neighborhood made some changes about the way that they treated people with these chronic illnesses and disabilities so that they did not experience that social stigma of that. So I'm curious for you all, how you all as healthcare providers hear that story, and if there's any way that you have seen in your parts of the healthcare system become more inclusive for individuals who have disabilities or chronic illnesses, and is there anything the church can learn from those practices? Erin?
So a major I guess, theme of occupational therapy, and I should have prefaced this earlier because not a lot of people know what occupational therapy is. Usually, more often than not, I've had people say occupational therapy, but I don't need a job. But occupational therapy is it's all about helping the patient get back to doing the things that they need to do to just live their daily lives, be that what we call ADLs, activities of daily living, like dressing, bathing, toileting. IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, more complex self-care things like cooking, cleaning, etc. And among many other things, we try to help people live their life to the fullest. And we have different ways of helping the patient do that. We have kind of more of a restorative point of view in our care, a compensatory point of view, an adaptive point of view, or a maintaining point of view. So typically with restoring, it's just as an example, say somebody, I don't know, broke a shoulder. We gradually work at their shoulder, teaching them stretchings that they can do, exercises they can do, and then gradually work their improve their strength in their shoulders so that they can, for example, just be able to, I don't know, like reach a grab bar and pull themselves up to stand up. Compensatory is a way of teaching, like a different way of completing a task. One of my favorite examples is I have worked with people, a lot of people who had hip surgeries, knee surgeries, and we teach them a compensatory strategy of dressing. For example, when say I had broken my right hip, I would put, when I was putting on pants, I'd put my weaker leg in first, and then the stronger leg, and then pull it up, and then when I take it off, I take the good leg out first, and then the broken leg. And adaptive is prescribing all kinds of adaptive equipment in order for people to do their daily tasks. For example, we prescribe hip kits a lot. It's a big old bag full of these different little instruments, like a sock aid for like people who can't bend over and put their shoes or their socks on. It's this just like a big old tube, and you put the sock on and then you pull it up.
It works well.
Yeah, it's
No, it was great. I didn't. My dad, he showed me this, and I was like, wow.
And then it also includes a reacher, which is just a little thing. It's got a little kind of pincher. You can pick up stuff off the floor. Shoehorn, that's kind of self-explanatory. Dressing sticks, it helps you like kind of take your socks or your shoes off a little easier. Long-handled sponges for being able to bathe yourself without having to bend over. And then maintaining, that's kind of, at least in my experience, maintaining is kind of more for outpatient. Like I've had people in independent living who they're just kind of trying to maintain their, I had one patient who had a little bit of difficulty with her neck range of motion. So I just taught her some exercises, some stretches that she can do on her own in addition to in therapy. Just maintaining, just trying to keep things as good as they can be. And I feel like the church could use those different points of view, like all these different people, like maybe somebody kind of needs an adaptive approach, like maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody with who's like neurodivergent and has some like hearing sensitivities. We could provide noise canceling headphones.
We have those in the back of our.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks to Kay Owen for that one. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sometimes we kind of need to meet people at their level. That's kind of more of a, I guess you could say that's more compensatory. Just something that I've learned, I was taught a lot in school and just in my own experience. It's occupational therapy, it's never one size fits all. Everybody comes from all these different walks of life and have all these different experiences, and that all deserves to be respected.
Well, everything that I hear and what you're saying is about honoring the dignity of every human being. Right?
Exactly.
That, to me, that is the
Well,
sacredness
yeah,
of that
You know,
call.
and you're just allowing them, like my dad, that he doesn't have to have somebody else put his socks on. You know, which, I mean, totally
Yeah.
cognitive, but he had trouble leaning over and putting his socks on. And then he showed me this device, and it was like, oh, where'd you get that? Oh, they showed me this, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wow, that's great. Oh my God. So,
That's awesome.
sorry.
I'm glad I was able to help them out.
Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
I've been sitting here praying about whether I should interject this, but
Go for it.
go for it, do it.
so bear with me, please. Having worked in a teaching hospital, you get exposed to a lot of things that you would never see in your typical community hospital. And one of my earliest experiences was a young person who had come in for a surgery, and I was part of what they referred to as the care team. So staff gets together and has discussions about the different patients. This person required an extra session. They didn't require it, the staff did. They were there for gender changing surgery. And it was an experience that, sorry, was very difficult.
I'm a gynecologist, and I have no idea what they go through, so.
Yeah, it was a lot of counseling, and I want people to understand there's so much counseling that goes on before that happens, but it's also for the staff, because a lot of people were very unkind, and it changed what I see of how people are affected. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get so emotional.
No.
It's obviously it lasted because this was a long time ago. But it brought people together in a way that just opened my eyes, which sort of made me start thinking about counseling, because I was not a counselor at the time. I was in a position of counseling, but I had not gone through the full tilt of study that I have now. But to watch and listen and participate in the discussions that took place were mind-opening, sight-opening, heart-opening. And I saw it in the staff. I saw it how the nursing staff talked to each other, because when this all first transpired and we were all told ahead of time that this person was coming in, we also had to learn about what type of counseling that person had had before they ever got to the point of having surgery. And it was immense.
How long ago was that?
This, oh dear, 35 years?
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there was a lot of controversy. First of all, we had to
Still is.
well, yeah, but you can imagine then. But we had not only, it was very difficult to maintain confidentiality because, of course, you didn't have HIPAA then, but we were told that you had to maintain confidentiality because of the controversy. But also the compassion that we gave to this person and what they had chosen to do and what that meant. And I've never seen a group of healthcare professionals come to a place that actually came from faith they didn't know existed within them. And that was partly due to the sessions that we had in our discussions. I've never said this in public before, because you're not going to know who they are. But if you have any questions further, I'd be happy to talk to you about them, because it showed me, and I could watch the progression in each person, because sorry for healthcare professionals, but some can be very snarky. And especially if you've been in surgery with surgeons, you don't want to do that.
Right.
Well, I have to say also that the person leading this had to have been extraordinary, but the people had to be led too. They had to be willing to, and this gets something that we have talked about 3 times this week, is because Rita worked in special ed in the schools, and almost all my kids, many of my kids had disabilities, and then it became personal when Jack came along.
Yeah.
But being able to see people for what they are, to see them, to see them in their totality is really sort of what this is all about. That's the most,
That's what our hymn,
one of the most important
that's what our
things.
hymn was about today.
Indeed,
Exactly.
being able to see them for what they are, and then imagine for them what they could be with the help that you have, and to make them the best forms of themselves. And that's what Erin does, and that's what Judy and Ann did, and that's what Gwyn did, and that's what I did. That to me is the healing part of medicine. And we talked about how sometimes you can't fix something. You can't get it better. You can't fix dementia. And I had a number of, when I went from my mixed adult pediatric practice to my pediatric practice, I brought a couple with dementia with me because I wasn't going to just sort of abandon them in their final year of life. I mean, I just wasn't going to do it. I was part of the family. I knew the kids. I knew what they were going through and what we would have to do together to get them through this time. And so being able to see people where they are and meet them at that level is the job. And some people were able to do that, and other people, it's just sort of, it's the job. It's just, it's moving people on through. And there's a spectrum within the healthcare industry, and the fact that it's become much more of a business and a corporate sort of thing, and there's productivity times and time that you have with the patient. It all comes on down at the end of the day. What are your values, and what do you value? And if I'm running late in the day, my patients knew that when they got in, they were going to get the same level of care that they needed. One other thing is that, and it took me a while to learn this, is to begin to talk to my kids who could understand rather than the parent. So the child was my patient. It won't be lost on any of you who are parents, and the parents were my patients as well. But that kid needed to have that agency that I'm happy to see you, and this is you're important to me, and I want to ask you the questions and sometimes that would grate against the parent because the parent wanted to tell me their story. I said, Johnny can talk, and I want to hear what he has to say about this because very often that really meant the world to Johnny. And for my kids, as they grew up with me and I left, many of them said that was one of the most important gifts that I ever gave them.
So we have about 9 minutes left, and in the interest of time, we're going to skip our talk on next week's passage, and we're going to save that conversation for next week. Next week is focusing on mental health, and I'll be preaching on Matthew's accounts of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Since we've already kind of touched on some mental health things already in our conversation. So in our last 8 minutes, I want to make sure that we honor time for everyone, but also to give you all a chance to ask any of our gracious panelists any questions today. Donna.
Well, you mentioned a broken health system. What do you see the future of the United States in medical care. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Other countries are doing so much better than we are. What do you see the future?
Anybody?
I
Big
think
question right there, but it's important. Very
Easy
important.
question.
gonna get worse, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in the, things are pendulums. Everything in life is a pendulum, and right now it's going to swing towards less. The problem is that as a healthcare system, it's become very corporatized. I mean, Cone was brought up by reason because it's got to sort of deal with the challenges presented by Atrium, which is Novant, which are the west of us, UNC and Duke, which are to the east of us, and to a certain extent, healthcare is a battle. It's a battle in your community to take care of your people in all their times, at all 24/7, all the time. And COVID is the best example I can come up with is what we did as a community at Cone Health to deal with that crisis that was in our community that has significantly changed everything. It raised salaries of some people, caused other people to leave healthcare. I mean, this is a really big problem. People, healthcare systems have got to get bigger or they die. It's like continuing to move or you die. And the bigger it gets, the more impersonal it can be, and that's where it comes to having individual people with their values, where the values come on through. And where they decide, well, yes, I understand what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do that the best I can, but taking care of my patients is the most thing. And right now, this is going to be under threat because we are spending just so much money on pharmaceuticals, on healthcare, So let me just stop there. But
Erin,
it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I recently had an experience. I was working with a patient in assisted living. I made a very good connection with this gentleman, and among other things, it was very difficult for him just mentally, emotionally, to get out of his room. But I was able to convince him, hey, like, you should come down to the therapy gym. We have a good time. And we played games and stuff, and that really meant a lot to him. I could just tell his disposition just lightened, just being around people, getting out of his room for a bit, change of scene. But then, unfortunately, this gentleman got COVID, and I was told by my boss that unfortunately we've got to discharge him. His copay is so much, and I'm like, God, just when in my opinion, just when he needed us most. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, there have been some times where I've just like, this is completely broken, there's absolutely nothing I can do. But I was talking to my counselor about this the other day, and I honestly think that something that we as a church, as individuals can do, while we can't completely fix everything with our broken healthcare, we can devote time. We can volunteer, just like try to be that change that we're wanting to see in our healthcare. Try to, even for just like an hour a week, find some sort of cause, be it healthcare or anything that means something to you. Dedicate your time. Time is precious. You can't put a price on time. Just take some time. I highly encourage take a little bit of time, find a cause, healthcare or otherwise, that means a lot to you. Donate some time.
Other questions for, Joyce?
I have a question about, you give an oath, Hippocratic oath, right?
First, do no harm.
Yeah, but why is so many young, I'm addressing you because you're OB-GYN. There's so many young women dying, especially women of color. What is happening with the OB-GYN service where they're not listening to these women? They're telling you things, but you don't seem to have feel like they know what they're talking about, and they end up either dying or both the baby and the mother are dying. So what happens with that oath and what is actually happening to these women today?
That's a difficult question, because, you know, we don't like babies to die, but the worst thing is to happen is when mothers die. And I remember he said, what's the worst thing that can happen? Was the chief, the chairman of the department said, what's the worst thing? And everyone was saying this and that. I said, if the mother dies. And he goes, and, you know, that hadn't happened to me. And then we had 3 situations where we had the mother die in our group of residents. There were 6 residents, 4 years, so it's 24 of us. So, and they weren't all at the same hospital, and there were different people that were involved in the care, different situations that happened. And we were in this funk. We were like horrible. You know, how did this happen? You know, how did this happen to us was like how we felt. And not that how did this happen to them, but how did this happen to us? And this one attending physician, he comes in and he says, what's the matter with you guys? And I said, he goes, okay, enough of this. And he says, because a lot of the attendings would say, you know, go, just get over it, come on. Well, we're not getting over it. And what he did is he had different physicians. He said, he picked the person that was most involved in the woman's care, and I was with one of them. And so he says, I want you to present the case. We went over to his house, we were drinking wine, fireplace and everything like that. He sits there and he says, you present the case. And he says, okay. And he says, now you take your notes and rip them up and throw them in the fire. And he told me that I couldn't keep my notes, so keep a copy of them, you know, if I needed to. And then he was talking about, what did you learn from this? And so I thought, well, learn. He says, I guarantee you, you'll forget what her name is, but you won't forget the situation. And situations that are like that, you won't let that happen again. And he was right. And I think that we have to answer a question, we have to have more humility. We have to understand, you know, what it is. Now, thank God I've never had any women when I was in private practice who died during childbirth. You know, I mean, thank God. I mean, just thanks, but I don't credit any kind of, thanks, you know. But I think that you have to figure out what is happening and then get better. And then you have to realize that, okay, we're not perfect. We've got a problem. We've got to fix it.
We have time for one more quick question if somebody's got.
But I'm not really answering your question, so I'll talk to you a little bit more if I could.
Rita, yeah, we'll give you final word here.
No
pressure, no pressure.
Better make it good. I don't have so much a question as some observations from this. I just want to applaud all of you all. And the interesting thing out of that, is that 5 of you up there, 4 of you are retired. And so it's kind of like feeling like, you know, our concerns and the things that we want to express in this room are preaching to the choir. Because you all have ended your careers and have spent the bulk of your careers in a different type of environment than what we are currently facing. Mm-hmm. And that's where my concern is. Mm-hmm. I just, you know, Judy, thank you so much for pointing out that when a patient or a client walks into your room, what they want is to be heard. Mm-hmm. No matter if it's mental health, physical health, they want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And that's where one of the challenges is in medical today, as Bill was addressing, when it's so corporate and you've got X number of minutes you can spend with a patient, and you don't have time to listen to them because you have to go through your checklist and you have to check and see.
Right.
And I appreciate that you all were practicing in a time where you didn't have to do that, and that you could do that. And Judy also pointed out it's honoring the body too, as well, you know, as listening. But I don't know if any of you all are familiar with Maria Shriver. She does a Sunday newsletter, and she, this is something that she said that was in her newsletter this morning. She's quoting someone else, and she said, "You have the opportunity to make a compassionate difference in this world every day. How are you going to do that?" And then Maria goes on to say, "I love that because it's a question that can be posed to each and every one of us. Each of us has the opportunity to make a compassionate difference every single day with our actions, our words, our deeds, and our lives. The question in front of all of us is, how are we going to do that today?" And I think that applies in the medical profession, when I go visit a doctor's office, I want the professional person I'm dealing with to be compassionate to me and to my situation. And I am one of the lucky ones that I have good insurance and I can access health care. And I think about all of those people who have to make such hard choices. And as we've said, it's broken. How can we fix it? And the one thing we have in our ability is compassion.
Is this Maria Shriver
Yes.
married
Yes,
to?
that
Maria Shriver,
Yeah, that one.
niece of the,
Yeah.
That's the one, Gwyn.
So friends, we are at our time, and I want to thank each of you all, Gwyn and Erin and Judy and Ann and Bill, for being our panelists. Thank you all for coming this day. I know this space has blessed me, because as your pastor and your preacher, I do a lot of talking. It's nice to listen, and it is nice to learn with you all and to be colleagues in ministry with each of you. So let's say a prayer, shall we? Gracious God, we give you thanks for this space of collaboration and conversation. We know that it is tempting to be daunted by the brokenness of our healthcare system, but we are so grateful for the professionals within those systems, like the 5 who are here today and others among us who are so dedicated to their work and who lead with compassion and care and dignity and respect for all those who are under their care. May we learn from their gifts. May we listen to the wisdom of your scripture that in a world where we have these systems that often marginalize so many, that we can write a different narrative, that we can be the authors of a better story, of your story, where together we build a neighborhood where no one falls through the cracks, where everyone has access to the health care that they need. So bless these healthcare workers and bless the helpers all around us as they do their sacred work. And may we as the church bless them in that work. This we pray in the great divine healer's name. Amen. Amen.